Hi, welcome to Caring for Natural Resources. This is Module B. My name's Jen Mojo. I'm a planner in the Agency of Natural Resources Central Office. This module is delivered online and is approximately 85 minutes long, and it's divided into 4 sections. I will first present Section 3, where local actions fit with other regulations. And Ethan Swift, a basin planner with the Department of Environmental Conservation, will present Section 4, called Non-Regulatory Tools. And I will present Section 5, Regulatory Tools Part 1 and Part 2. We've talked about planning, mapping, and local values. We know those factors are going to affect what tools you choose to keep your resources healthy. So that is what we're talking about next, the house. Module B will be all about strategies you can use locally for maintaining and enhancing natural resources. We'll cover Module B in 3 sections. First, we'll talk about what certain state and federal regulations do and what they don't. And this will hopefully help you see the places where your local efforts can make a difference. Then we'll look at non-regulatory and regulatory tools you can use to advance your community values. The main goal for Module B is to help you become familiar with the range of tools available so that you can make decisions about what actions to take in your community. You won't become experts in each tool, and that's okay. It's our hope that this overview will allow you to become more comfortable with the different choices and tools available. We'll provide a list of resources in the course packet where you can learn more about each tool. Before we start, I should say that in this section, when I talk about tools, I mean strategies and actions for achieving natural resource goals. Non-regulatory tools include things like education, outreach to landowners, and conservation. An example is the Use Value Appraisal Program, also known as Current Use. Using regulatory tools, a town can require that land be developed or managed in a specific way. The most common is zoning and subdivision regulations. One thing to point about regulatory tools is that they're not always you can or you can't when it comes to development. Often regulatory tools guide how something happens, like site design, or they might require that construction near an important natural resource be sited a little bit differently than originally proposed. The particular tools you choose will reflect the balance that makes sense locally. Usually this will be a combination of regulatory and non-regulatory tools. But the level of complexity and particular tools you choose will depend on your community. Remember, there will be a different balance in each town between private property rights and things that are done in the service of the community as a whole. And that's okay, it just needs to be acknowledged. Striking the right balance with your choices is the work of the Planning Commission. Something else that, regardless of the tools that you choose, is the kind of outreach, connection, and education that's found in non-regulatory approaches is always essential for setting the stage, and that will be discussed in Section 4. Section 3, where local actions fit with other regulations. State and federal regulations apply to many natural resources, but not to all. There are state and federal laws that regulate natural resources, but by and large, natural resource protection falls to the local level. So why are there different actors involved? For a number of reasons, and this includes the importance of the resource and federal or state preemption of the resource. So to give you a sense of this, I'm going to walk through 3 different examples of regulations that don't take place exclusively at the local level, and then point out where there's a chance for local action to fill in the gaps. These next 3 examples are all state programs, but they are separate permitting processes. The first example is Act 250. What is Act 250? Most people in Vermont have heard of it. It was a law that was adopted in the late 1960s to review the environmental impacts of larger projects. Larger scale projects trigger Act 250 review. For example, commercial or industrial construction on lots over an acre trigger Act 250 in towns without both zoning and subdivision regulations. For towns with subdivision and zoning, the trigger is 10 acres. There are also other thresholds related to the number of housing units or lots created. Projects must meet the Act 250's 10 criteria, which relate to natural resources like air, water, and soils, also to local and regional plan conformance. Projects are reviewed by citizen commissions in each region of the state, and there are opportunities for the public to be involved. So why does this matter? It's an important process because it takes into account the potential impacts of development on resources that have a statewide importance or that are regionally important, so it provides a higher level view. Some have credited Act 250 with helping keep Vermont's landscape intact and even helping Vermont avoid some of the boom and bust cycles that have happened in other states. This is only a very basic overview of Act 250. If you're interested in more details or specifics, you can click on the link in the slide. Also, if you have specific questions about a project, you can call the district coordinator in the district for where your project is located. Act 250 is often in the news, and based on this, you might think that Act 250 reviews most development and addresses most of the environmental and community impacts. However, according to a study conducted by the Vermont Natural Resources Council, only about 1 to 2% of subdivisions in the 22 case study towns were large enough to trigger Act 250 review. Although this is a sample, it suggests that Act 250 reviews much less development than people think. Act 250 only reviews the project itself, and so it does not assess the cumulative impacts of a project. This means that it's not a finely tuned instrument when it comes to addressing incremental impacts like forest or habitat fragmentation. Act 250 often relies on A&R permits as well. In other words, it does not offer additional protections beyond what the state already requires. So what can be done locally? Because Act 250 only reviews large projects and because development is happening incrementally, towns have a few opportunities to step in. Towns can make sure that their regulations review the projects that are below Act 250's thresholds. For example, in a town that just has zoning, Act 250 only reviews projects over an acre. So the town may wish to make sure that they have environmental review criteria for projects on smaller lots. As an example, many dollar stores in Vermont are under the threshold for Act 250 review, so can be captured at the local level by zoning. Towns can also develop local standards. Act 250 is known for its environmental standards. A town may choose to incorporate more specific standards into their own regulations. There's also the opportunity to review smaller subdivisions and commercial projects locally, and to add standards to zoning and subdivision bylaws that go beyond to address natural resource impacts. Act 250 is one example of non-local regulation, where there's still opportunity to improve upon it locally. I'm going to provide two more examples now, wetlands and stormwater, where permitting occurs at the state level. So wetlands, what are they and why are they important? Wetlands are areas that support wetland vegetation, hydrology, and soils. They help fight pollution by acting as filters, they help abate floods, and they provide wildlife habitat. However, once wetlands are gone, they're gone. Constructed wetlands don't replace all of the lost wetland functions, though they can sometimes provide stormwater protections. This means that the functions they provide are important to preserve to begin with. Wetlands regulation is about more than what appears on the map. According to the Vermont wetland rules, wetlands are regulated by the state if they have soils, plants, and hydrology that make up a wetland. There are Class 1 wetlands, which require a 100-foot undisturbed buffer where no building is allowed. Class 2 wetlands require a 50-foot buffer, but allow building under certain circumstances. If you have questions, please contact your district wetland ecologist. So there are limitations to the wetland regulations. You may think that no impacts to wetlands are allowed and all wetlands that require permits are mapped. However, not all Class 2 wetlands are mapped. Smaller wetlands that likely qualify as a Class 2 wetland, like vernal pools or forested wetlands, are not typically on the state wetland maps. In other words, according to DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, Wetlands that aren't on the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory may still be considered significant and subject to regulation under Vermont law. The Vermont wetland rules may also allow for development in Class 2 wetlands. And the picture here on the slide is a picture of the Vermont Significant Wetland Inventory map. There are local opportunities to fill in some of these gaps. Your town can write town plan policies about protecting wetlands for the use in Act 250 and Section 248 processes that could yield more protection than the Vermont wetland rules. Your town can also undertake a local wetland inventory. You could develop zoning standards for wetlands identified in that inventory, for example, requiring larger buffers around Class 2 wetlands or prohibiting building envelopes within buffers around those wetlands. With an inventory, you can also upload the files into the state's wetland advisory layer. It doesn't affect what the state regulates, but you can call attention to the wetlands that aren't on the official Vermont State Wetland Inventory map. Finally, you can petition the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources to have a wetland added to the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory through a process spelled out in the Vermont wetland rules. There's a link to this resource on the resources website. The last example is stormwater regulations. What is stormwater? Stormwater is simply the water that runs off the land, including rain and snowmelt. And it's important to address because stormwater picks up pollutants like bacteria, sediment, phosphorus, and nitrogen, and then deposits them into water bodies. So if we take a look at Lake Champlain, which is polluted for phosphorus, there's also less dramatic examples too. All kinds of pollution can be created by stormwater runoff, including enlarged stream channels, lower base flows of streams, and increased pollution. And pollution can be everything from grease and oil running off of paved surfaces to sediment. So how is stormwater currently regulated? State permits are required for the creation of 1 or more acres of impervious surface. And an impervious surface means a surface that water can't be absorbed into. Permits are also required if there is more than 1 acre of land disturbed during construction. In addition, there are federal stormwater permit programs, including programs that apply to larger municipalities and industrial sites. So you may have heard of the MS4 permit, which regulates larger municipalities, or the MSGP permit, which regulates industrial sites. With 2 types of permits that regulate stormwater, it may seem like it's widely regulated, and that stormwater permits help keep water clean. However, most projects don't require permits. For example, only 6% of the impervious surface area in the Lake Champlain Basin is currently subject to the regulation under a state operational stormwater permit. And this is the area of the state where development is most likely to trigger a permit. Only construction permit projects over 1 acre in size require a construction stormwater permit, and this is not the majority of projects. Construction sites can discharge up to 2,000 times more sediment than forested areas. Even if a state stormwater permit is required and all conditions are met, it still allows for increases in sediment and phosphorus over existing conditions. So permits actually allow for a certain amount of additional pollution. So what can be done locally to manage stormwater? There's a number of opportunities when it comes to managing stormwater better, so that it infiltrates into the ground rather than carrying pollutants into the surface water. Municipalities can perform demonstration projects like the rain barrel on the right here. A municipality can create stormwater bylaws, for example, requiring that the threshold for a permit be a ½ acre rather than an acre. There are also local road standards through Act 64. And a municipality can require or encourage green stormwater infrastructure for smaller projects, or encourage it in providing education on how to perform it. So those are a few examples where state programs apply in a limited way and leave gaps available for towns to take action. Next, I'd like to talk about a state-level program that provides new opportunities for action at the local level, as well as some requirements. The Vermont Clean Water Act was passed in 2015 in order to implement the cleanup plan for Lake Champlain. However, it includes programs and requirements that will help improve water quality statewide. A few programs in particular that can or must be undertaken locally include municipal road permits, addressing stormwater from existing impervious surfaces, and river and corridor floodplain protections. These programs also include priorities that will help the state implement priorities in various TMDLs, or total maximum daily loads. A TMDL is essentially a pollution allowance budget and cleanup plan for impaired water bodies. We'll talk about these tools in more detail, but for now you should know that towns have the opportunity to participate through the tactical basin planning process to improve water quality in various areas. It's also useful to know that the benefit for doing this is the high priority projects identified in the tactical basin plans get priority for the Department of Environmental Conservation Eco Restoration Program funding, or ERP.